1973, Springsteen released this. And this. And this. Jim Rotolo and Greg Drew take you through Bruce's critically acclaimed second album from the monumental 50th anniversary of The Wild, The Innocent, and the E Street Shuffle. Starts now on E Street Radio.
Hello, E Street Nation, and welcome to a special E Street Radio program celebrating the 50th anniversary of the release of Bruce Springsteen's second studio album, The Wild, The Innocent, and the E Street Shuffle. I'm Jim Rotolo. Greg Drew is joining me, and we are about to go through Bruce Springsteen's album track by track. And not only that, Greg, when we complete the studio album, we're going to be going through the outtakes as well. This is going to be a lot of fun.
It'll be a lot of fun, and as somebody once wrote, you know, you're talking about a song, an album title, 2 adjectives and a dance step, which pretty much covers it.
Yes, it does. So the album was recorded in May, and it was released in November 5th of 1973 is the release date, and recorded at 914 Sound Studios in New York.
You can tell that.
Yeah. Well, give me a little insight into that. What do you mean?
It's just from a musician production, whatever you want to call it, point of view, it wasn't state of the art at the time. Mm-hmm. And it's understandable. They were, they had a not terribly successful first record. Right. And this was a very different kind of record, much more of a band record than a singer-songwriter record like the first one was. And, there are places, like on New York City Serenade, you can hear the pedals squeaking when David Sanchez is doing the piano solo, and there's little things like that. Okay. Obviously, by the time they did Born to Run, the album, they had upgraded considerably. But it doesn't detract from the fun of this record. Absolutely.
And again, fun is one of the great words to describe the album, because again, this is the follow-up to the first album, Greetings, which didn't sell too well, didn't do too well. And as John Hammond, who signed Bruce, he wanted him more packaged as a singer-songwriter, a Bob Dylan type, and that didn't seem to want to be what Bruce wanted to do.
I think Bruce once made said something along the lines of, "I've been doing that for 6 months, and I've been in bands for 10 years, and they went with the 6 months." I mean, in other words, you can tell just from the way this record sounds right from the very first track that he was much more comfortable in a band rock and roll kind of situation. Mm-hmm. And, he was
playing in bar bands forever.
Yeah, and I think that's why, and this was also representative of the kinds of shows that he was doing as an opening act and an occasional headliner. I mean, this is the kind of show that people saw when they went to see Bruce Springsteen at the time.
Right. And it's very much a band album, and as we'll go through the tracks of this album, you'll hear, and we'll talk about the standout performances of the musicians on this album, and there's several of them that we'll get through.
Much more noticeable on this record than the first one, which was part of the reason I think it was such a... especially coming such a short time after the first record, I think it was a surprise to people.
Yeah.
I think people were like, whoa, this is, not only is this different, but this is really good. This is kind of cool. I mean, you can, right from the start, obviously we're going to start with E Street Shuffle. There's more electric guitar on the first song than there is on the whole Greetings album.
Right.
And that alone was, obviously a big change. And his singing, why I don't think it compared to what he was capable of down the road, but he definitely sounded much more confident. He sounded like a rock and roll singer, as opposed to somebody who was trying to fit into something. Yeah, as a singer-songwriter.
Yeah, and I think this is more of an album that tells more of the story writing, the stories that are written in these songs, the characters that are in here. I think they're more developed. I think they're more. I think he gives a much better explanation of the boardwalk life,
Well,
especially in these first two songs.
yeah, there's a great contrast between the New York City songs and the Jersey Shore songs, which was part of what made the album so interesting.
Well, that's what I always was attracted to with this album, because this album to me, if you grew up in New Jersey and, you know, especially where I grew up with New York City in my backyard every day, seeing it, you know, I kind of look at this album in the same way, you know, I guess where Bruce was at that point in his life. Like, he's from this small town, he's, you know, this boardwalk life, this kind of thing. And you know that there's a bigger world out there, and there's something that you want to get to, and there's a whole world of adventure and romance and sex and all violence, and all of this is happening, and it's right over there.
Well,
and
and
eventually I got to get out of here to get to there.
You know, he used to do that thing like lots of people, where he would go to Greenwich Village and either go see music, or they played sometimes down at the old Cafe Wa and some of the other places. So it was sort of, and plus obviously all the business, the Columbia Records was in New York City, and you know, so that a lot of the business part of the music business he was doing was here. And of course that was fulfilling that sort of promise that you're talking about. You know, you go to New York and you become a big deal.
Sure.
You know?
Doesn't everybody?
Well, it certainly worked for you, Jim.
Worked much better for Bruce. All right, let's jump into the record. We're going to start off where you need to start off, which is the very beginning. Side one, opening track, E Street Shuffle.
E Street Radio pays tribute to one of Bruce's most treasured albums. 50 years after its release. Only on Sirius XM E Street Radio.
So there are the first two songs from The Wild, the Innocent, and the E Street Shuffle. It's E Street Radio. We're celebrating the 50th anniversary of the release of The Wild, the Innocent, and the E Street Shuffle. 4th of July, Asbury Park, Sandy. I mean, you know, the song tells itself. It's the story of the life at the boardwalk at the end of the summer. It's sort of an end of an era. It's the end of a period in time for this guy, this character. It's Bruce. It's whoever you want it to be. He's saying goodbye to everything, and he's got to move on to something bigger and better.
Well, I think it was also, that song was sort of the beginning of the myth of the beloved Jersey Shore, and obviously musically, Danny's accordion set that mood, and it's really, it's funny. There are a number of these songs on this album, of which Sandy is clearly one of them, that became staples for the live shows for the next decade.
Sure.
And, you know, Sandy obviously was one of those. And you know, there was the background choir is different. The little keyboard glockenspiel on the third verse is very cool. Gary and Vinny Lopez did some very cool things together, and you know, and then E Street Shuffle, which was a great kickoff to the album. It's still, you know, Bruce always joked about Greetings, that his rhyming dictionary caught on fire. I think it's almost true on that song as well. That there's a lot of words in E Street Shuffle, and that, again, that was part of what made him interesting, because it was like you know, some of the mid-'60s Dylan stuff,
right,
with a more modern and more urban sound.
Yeah, and I love that Bruce, in one of the books that was written about him, there's a quote that he said about the song, the E Street Shuffle. He said, "I wanted to invent a dance song with no exact steps," which is exactly what the E Street Shuffle is.
Absolutely. And if you've ever seen Bruce dance, that sort of fits, but we'll move on from there.
All right. That's Greg Drew. I'm Jim Rotolo, and we are going track by track through Bruce Springsteen's second album, The Wild, the Innocent, and the E Street Shuffle, here on E Street Radio. Now, coming up, a song that settle in for a little bit.
Well, again, this is a song that became a centerpiece for the live show, and as long as it is on the record, I mean, they would do it live, and it would be 5, 6, 10 minutes longer, and it's a brand new sound. It's
jazzy.
It's jazzy. It's Bruce playing lead guitar like he hadn't on any of the first record. You got David
Organ
Sanchez
solo.
going nuts. You got the big man. Gary has this great walking bass thing that he does after the solo. It's got a little bit of like a Van Morrison kind of feel to it, which is, again, that was somebody that Bruce enjoyed his music, and that was also, Van was sort of unique, but actually more than sort of unique. But he was somebody who was popular at the time and was a little bit off center, not the mainstream, and that fit. The other cool thing, given my background with vocals and vocalists, when he's doing at the very end, when he's doing the Kitty's Back in Town, if you listen close, Bruce sings every one of them slightly differently.
Oh, okay.
It's Kitty, and then Kitty's back, and
True.
He just puts a little different, which again, that's one of the things that great singers do. I mean, Aretha in the chorus of Natural Woman does the same thing. You're singing the same line 3 times in a row, but if you do it a little differently every time, it makes for a really interesting vocal performance.
All right, well, we'll listen for that right now. Here we go. It's Kitty's Back.
15 years of the wild, the innocent, and the E Street Shuffle. E Street Shuffle. On Sirius XM E Street Radio.
So there's Wild Billy as E Street Radio celebrates the 50th anniversary of the release of The Wild, the Innocent, and the E Street Shuffle. Jim Rotolo, Greg Drew. Wild Billy's Circus Story. Greg, go for it.
Well, that is probably the song that's most like something off the first album. It's got a lot of parts, a lot of different musical sections, a lot of moving pieces, and in a funny way, I've got a special coming up where I talk about Bruce as a songwriter, and I almost was going to use that song off of this album, although I ended up choosing a different one, which you'll understand in a couple of minutes. But it's a great story song.
That it is.
And when he does that line at the end about son, you want to try the big top, that's just it's a great performance. As I said, it's not the easiest song in the world to play. There's a lot of different parts, and I always thought later on it was interesting that where the next stop was Nebraska. I don't know if that was like foreshadowing.
Foreshadowing, yeah. Gotta wait a little bit to get to Nebraska. It took a while to get to Nebraska.
Well, 9 years and a couple of murders, but no, it was just again that's a song from Asbury Park, that area, whether it was the summer carnival or the boardwalk that was, always there.
Well, I read that it was, Bruce had said it was inspired by a local circus that used to come every summer to Freehold.
That's I grew up in the suburbs, and we had things like that, the county fair or the like a circus or whatever that would come to town for like a week, the carnival. Yeah, and it certainly is a piece of that, sort of nostalgia. And again, you got this contrast between Kitty's Back, which to me always sounded like a city song.
Wait, I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you, but the background behind Kitty's Back, I did all this research about where these inspirations for these songs came from. So according to, again, this is one of the articles or interviews that Bruce did. This was early on. He said Kitty's Back came from a neon sign that he saw promoting a popular strip show at a local club along the Jersey Shore.
That may be true.
One night only, Kitty's Back.
That may be true. However, the actual song itself struck me as a listener as coming from Manhattan.
Yeah.
And that could have been just the jazz or the, looking down the block and all those sorts of things that, that are urban as opposed to, suburban or whatever, resort town kind of things. And so, and I don't know, Kitty just to me always seemed like she was a
New York
city girl.
Yeah, New York girl. Absolutely.
Yeah.
One final thing we should mention about Wild Billy Circus Story is the tuba playing of one Mr. Gary Talent. Now, help me out with this, because you've been in bands. You're a musician. Okay, everybody seems to have their part in the band, the instruments that they play, and I know people play more than one instrument, but I would really love to know how the tuba. Gary, you know how to play tuba. Let's get one in here. How does that come about?
The one thing I would say is that the tuba is in a horn section.
Right.
The tuba is like the bass. It's in that frequency and in that range, melodically, and so it's not like if you said to me, "Hey, well, Gary, learn to play one horn," or it knows, I would be like, "Oh, maybe the tuba," because it's a bass. It's low notes.
Yeah.
It's the foundation, and it's funny because there are times where bass players will play a part that almost sounds like a tuba part. Example, Paul McCartney on Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds plays a part that could have been played on a tuba if he was part of a marching band or whatever. And so that's I think that's where it comes from.
Okay. And I think it also maybe it has a little bit to do with kind of that circus music, the oompa kind of thing.
That's absolutely, I'm sure, why they chose to use that instead of a bass guitar. But I'm just saying it is, what you would play on the tuba is not, as far as the notes go, are not dissimilar to what you would play on a bass guitar. It just has a slightly different feel to it.
Right. Okay. Well, that's side one of The Wild, the Innocent, and the E Street Shuffle.
Look out, gang.
We're going to kick off side two right now with two songs that have to be played back to back. There's no other way to do it. I have people on my Friday All Request show tell me it's the law. You can't play one without the other. So we're going to play them back to back right now. We're going to follow the law here on E Street Radio. But before we do that, Greg, you have a quote from a good friend of ours.
Well, I think a lot of people were astonished by the growth that came from album 1 to album 2. And certainly somebody who wrote about that very eloquently was our friend Dave Marsh. And in Born to Run, the book, which was written after Darkness, Dave wrote about Incident, and he wrote the following. There are precious few moments in rock when you can hear a musician overcoming both his own limitations and the restrictions of the form. At those times, the music flows into something so awesome that its force is undeniable. For Springsteen, the watershed came on his second album. If he has written greater music, explored the possibilities of his ideas more completely, made better recordings, none of it can ever sound quite this fresh. Neither he nor we will ever again be quite so astonished by the dimensions of his talent.
Bruce's second album turns 50. Recorded at 914 Sound Studios and released on November 5th, 1973 by Columbia Records. The Wild, the Innocent, and the E Street Shuffle on E Street Radio.
We're back here on E Street Radio celebrating the 50th anniversary of the release of Bruce Springsteen's second album, The Wild, the Innocent, and the E Street Shuffle. We're into side two. Jim Rotolo, Greg Drew. Now, once this album is done, once we've gone through all the tracks in the album, we've got some bonus tracks, the outtakes, if you will. So you definitely want to stick around and check those out. But we did Incident into Rosalita, and we have to talk about these songs in their order. So let's start with Incident, Greg. Just a beautiful song.
Everything that Dave said is exactly true, not just the lyrics and the melody, but also, the singing, the playing. You got David playing a great piano part. You got Bruce's guitar at the end. Mm-hmm. It's really just a terrific record. And, it sets up what comes after just perfectly. In a lot of ways, it might be the best recording on the album.
I would agree with that. You just feel like you're in somewhere in New York City, and it's nighttime.
It's like a mini movie,
and it's 1973, so it's gritty.
Yeah, it's somebody could have made a movie out of that. It is. It's like it's a story song. It's a rock song. It's everything. It's what the best of Bruce Springsteen.
Yeah. And following it up, of course, it wouldn't be a Bruce Springsteen and an E Street Band concert without it.
The greatest set closer of all time. And we did a special 10 years ago for the 40th anniversary. And I said at the time that one of my favorite lyrics in all of rock and roll is, I know your mama don't like me because I play in a rock and roll band. Having played in a rock and roll band and been around a lot of rock and roll bands, the great part about that line, just to go one step further here for a second, the dad is not going to like the guy. I mean, that's a given, okay? But a lot of times moms can be a little more tolerant, but a little more.
True.
Okay, but the fact that she doesn't like you
right,
because you play in a rock and roll band, well, that's a lot to overcome. But, he had that big advance from the record company, so that, maybe that helped.
Bruce once called it his greatest love song.
That's probably true.
And it's loosely based on a true story. From what we understand,
well, I believe,
but Rosalita could be many different women. It's not. It could be several women. It's not one. There's not one particular person. It's a combination of things.
He has sort of hinted at times that it was sort of about the woman he was seeing at the time.
Yeah.
But it's like you said, it's every woman. I mean, every guy, especially guys that play in a rock and roll band,
right?
Have their own Rosalita.
I was going to say there were Rosalita stories happening all over the United States, especially once the Beatles played Ed Sullivan, yes. that changed everything.
Well, and also I've got to say I love the fact that from time to time he would change that little bridge section at the first night at Madison Square Garden, which is about a week or two after the Rolling Stone cover story came out. He changed it to, you can tell him I'm almost grown. I got my pretty picture on the cover of the Rolling Stone. And as he says that, he puts on a pair of wraparound sunglasses as he says the words Rolling Stone. And I thought, this is the coolest guy in the planet. He's changing the song to fit what's going on. And, sometimes it's been the record company who gave me the big bucks. Mm-hmm. There have been a number of different ones from time to time, but it's always, whenever you see that song, it's always a treat. And the great part about the E Street Band is as it's gone on, they've added sections. They've made it even better than the original recording, which was great, but I think the reason it became such a set closer and showstopper and still is included 50 years down the road is because of all the things that they've added to it since then.
But you know what? The original stands the test of time, and generation after generation, you go anywhere, I want to say anywhere in the world, and that song comes on in a store, on a jukebox, in a bar, at the airport, wherever you are. When you hear Rosalita, you feel the room light up a little bit. Everybody loves
Well,
Rosalita.
it's a great, it's a great Romeo and Juliet kind of thing of the guy trying to convince the woman and her parents that he's okay after all.
Yeah.
And even though he plays in a rock and roll band, I think we all know what that means.
Yeah, trouble. Well, we've got one more song left to go before we wrap up The Wild, the Innocent, and the E Street Shuffle. The album, well, we still have a lot more outtakes, so we're going to get to all of them, but we're going to come back with the final track of the album itself. And it is, talk about, to me, saving the best for last.
Well, you could say that pretty much about the whole second side. It's,
True.
Again, it's showing off their musical skills from David's piano at the beginning, which is just magnificent, to Bruce playing the acoustic guitar in a way that you just didn't hear very often on rock and roll records, and a great solo in the middle from the big man, and it's a song that has a lot of moving parts, very complicated musically, and yet easy to understand.
Yep. This is New York City Serenade.
A grand fusion of nostalgic rock and roll and soulful R&B. This is the 50th anniversary special of The Wild, the Innocent, and the E Street Shuffle on E Street Radio.
So there it is, the final song off the studio album, The Wild, the Innocent, and the E Street Shuffle, New York City Serenade. And what better way to wrap up an album with a song about Billy, a fish lady, and a junk man. There you go.
Yeah. Well, it's one of the great things about this album is you've got at least 5 songs that are still, and if you want to count E Street Shuffle, it's 6, that are still a core part of a great Bruce Springsteen show. Mm-hmm. And, when he brought out the strings for New York City Serenade back in, I think it was
2016.
2016, that was just like, it was so great. And the same thing when, they still do Kitty's Back. They were doing that on the current tour. Mm-hmm. And, E Street Shuffle makes its appearance from time to time. And of course, Incident and Rosalita. I mean, with this record, he had sort of provided the core of what made him generally acknowledged by, within a few years as like the best live performer in rock and roll. And a lot of it has to do with these songs, and not just the songs themselves and the recordings, but then what the band did with them when they played them live.
Yep. Yeah, became, and that's really where Bruce became this, on the East Coast at least, this rock and roll hero.
Oh yeah, he was up through probably the river. He was more known for being a great live performer than he was. I mean, Rosalita got played on FM rock radio. Obviously, Born to Run did, Thunder Road, Badlands. He wasn't ignored, but in terms of, he wasn't like a. For instance, he didn't have hit records like Bob Seger had hit records.
Right, charting records, yeah.
Yeah, but by the time when it crossed over to top 40 and back then AM radio, and once you... but he was legendary as a live performer,
When you're recording 7.5 minute songs.
Yeah, well, that's,
radio wouldn't touch those. FM did. But
well, like I said, they were...
radios did.
I played Rosalita on my college radio station.
Right, that's where it could get played.
In long time ago. But, I mean, yeah, and as legendary as it is, Thunder Road and Born to Run were not hit singles on the Billboard Top 100 chart. Neither was Prove It All Night or Badlands. These were, FM rock hits.
Right.
But, but it's still, by 1978, by the Darkness Tour, which featured a lot of these songs.
Yes.
He was known as like, it's the best live show in rock and roll.
Right.
And then, of course, they made records that could translate to hit singles, and he became Bruce Springsteen. And I hear he has a channel on Sirius Radio.
There he does, and we're here right now. That's Greg Drew. I'm Jim Rotolo, and we're celebrating the 50th anniversary of the release of The Wild, the Innocent, and the E Street Shuffle, and talk about... legendary live performance songs as we get into the outtakes section. These are the songs that didn't make the album, especially this one. Wow. But this was a song that became sort of a legend in the bootleg world because it was released it was leaked, I should say.
Bruce's manager sent a copy of this. What we're going to hear was just a demo.
Yeah.
And Mike Bell sent it to certain radio stations that had been supportive of Bruce, like MMR in Philadelphia and
Kid Leo and Ed Shockey.
Yeah, and so it became one of these, like you'd maybe catch it once a week on one of those stations if you're in the, and you drive around your car for a couple hours hoping that they play it. He actually performed it, which I was shocked. First night at Madison Square Garden, he broke it out back in 1978, and it was just like, whoa, okay. And by that point, Southside's version was out.
Okay.
But he did it his way, and it was like, oh, this is pretty great. And the other thing that was funny is it was not on the original tracks.
No, it was not.
And y'all were upset about that. and they got the message, and they put it on the subsequent 18 tracks. At this point, this is one of the first things that they did for Wild the Innocent studio sessions, and you can sort of hear they really didn't have a great idea about how to make records yet. They were learning, but it's a terrific song. It
is. So let's take a listen to it. This is one of the outtakes, the first of the outtakes from the Wild, the Innocent, and the E Street Shuffle.
This is most cherished albums. Marking the milestone of 50 years of the Wild, the Innocent, and the E Street Shuffle on E Street Radio.
So there's the Fever, one of the many outtakes of the Wild, the Innocent, and the E Street Shuffle. We're here on E Street Radio celebrating the 50th anniversary of Bruce Springsteen's second studio album. Jim Rotolo and Greg Drew. Anything else you wanted to add about the Fever other than it's awesome?
No, that pretty much does it, and it's always fun when you get to see him do it. And it's a great, that takes nothing away from Southside Johnny's version, which is also great.
Absolutely.
But it's a lot of fun.
Right, it is. And so the next track we're going to get into, well, I don't know what there is to say about Bishop Danced.
Well, the only thing I'd say is I think it's great that it features Danny on accordion, and this was the version that they put out on tracks. And it's just Bruce and Danny from the late lamented Max's Kansas City in Manhattan. And it's just a fairly, not terribly greatly recorded version of the song, but you get to hear Danny on accordion, which is always a treat.
That it is. All right, here's Bishop Danced.
50 years of music and memories. The 50th anniversary of the Wild, the Innocent, and the E Street Shuffle on E Street Radio.
We're back here on E Street Radio celebrating the 50th anniversary of the Wild, the Innocent, and the E Street Shuffle. We're in the outtakes segment of the show. We heard Bishop Danced there, and we heard The Fever earlier. Now, moving ahead, we've got 3 songs in a row we're going to play, all very different in their own way. We'll start with Zero and Blind Terry.
Yeah, just it's of a type. It's one of these songs with many sections and some great organ playing, which almost overwhelms the vocals. But it's also, not to be hypercritical, but I don't think Bruce was as confident a singer as he certainly became within a few years. You get that kind of mumble talk singing thing on a lot of these songs, and it fits the song, but it's also, these 3 are kind of a type. Seaside Bar Song, which is the number 2, that's like a fun rock club song.
Right.
And Hey Santa Ana, I actually heard that and the last song we're going to play on the same bootleg from the Main Point in Philadelphia.
Okay.
It's another one that's got a lot of parts, a lot of parts, a lot of words, including one couplet that showed up a couple years later and She's the One.
Right.
This was kind of when they were probably experimenting in the studio. There's like a Leslie guitar effect, which I don't ever remember Bruce using before or after, but it must have been around that day. And let's try this.
Let's see if this fits.
let's try this.
Well, talk about using all the tools in the toolbox. I mean, Zero and Blind Terry, to me, there's a similarity to Incident in that storyline of the characters that are in it. So it's a song it's definitely grown on me quite a bit over the years. I now enjoy it a lot more than I used to because I don't know why. I like it. There's something, I like to use the term gritty about it. It's you said, I like that kind of mumbling sort of singing that Bruce is doing on this track. I wouldn't call it mumbling, but something gravelly kind of thing.
Talk sing
kind of thing. He's like telling you a story, and he is telling you a story.
He's absolutely telling you a story. It's interesting that one of the things that changed between this record and the record to follow, Born to Run, is, instead of having, say 25 words per musical line, they cut it down to maybe 10 or 12.
Right.
And again, that just made things a lot more complicated, but it could also be endearing to the listener when you have to sit there and study, like, wait, what was that line? What was that line? And you keep repeated listens.
Right.
You get like a new phrase every time, you know?
Yeah, and Seaside Bar Song's just one of those fun, it's a bar song. It's bar music. Bruce talked about hanging out at the Osprey, which is in Manasquan, New Jersey. He's still there, by the way, and seeing Bo Diddley perform there.
Yeah, well, he name drops Bo Diddley during the song.
Yeah.
It's part of the lyrics, although, again, as the lyrics are flying by, it's hard to pick it up sometimes. But I'm sure that was something that went over in clubs great.
Yep. All right, so here's 3 in a row. Zero and Blind Terry, Seaside Bar Song, and then Hey Santa Ana. And we're going to come back with more as we continue to celebrate the 50th anniversary of The Wild, the Innocent, and the E Street Shuffle here on E Street Radio.
It was 5 decades ago when Bruce released one of his most influential albums of all time. The Wild, the Innocent, and the E Street Shuffle. We're celebrating the anniversary on E Street Radio.
We're back here on E Street Radio, and we're continuing to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the release of The Wild, the Innocent, the E Street Shuffle. Greg Drew and myself, Jim Rotolo, we've been going track by track. Well, we went through the album. We've gone through most of the outtakes, and we've got one more outtake. Another one saving the longest for last, I guess.
Well, and it was designed to be a set closer.
Before Rosalita was the set closer. This was the set closer.
And as Bruce has talked about, they would he wanted to have a song like this that had a lot of different sections. Maybe a dozen or more. It's hard to keep track.
How about several different endings?
Several different endings, several different beginnings before he actually gets to the verse. Again, this was part of the first time I heard this was that great Main Point bootleg, and it was designed to just be a fun set closer. It gave Clarence a chance to show off. It gave Bruce a chance to show off on guitar. And we don't have one of those early live versions, unfortunately, that's up to snuff quality-wise. And honestly, I think the version on tracks doesn't really cut it. So we're going to use the version from the show, the Wild, the Innocent show that he did at Madison Square Garden in 2009. And honestly, I think they took it up a whole nother level. With Nils and Susie doing the middle section in unison with Bruce and Clarence, and it might have been the last time Clarence ever got to play this song. Just for the baby's back, you got to have Clarence's version. So it's a great song, and it's still one that he breaks out from time to time, and it's still as fun as it was the first time you heard it.
Yeah, yeah. So we're going to leave you with that, E Street Nation. Thunder Crack from Madison Square Garden back in 2009. That was on the Working on a Dream tour when Bruce and the E Street Band performed the entire The Wild, the Innocent, and the E Street Shuffle album. Greg, this was fun. It's always great to go back and go through these albums song by song and dissect them and find little pieces and little interesting tidbits about them.
Well, this was the record that I think you could say began the climb up the rock and roll, hierarchy. Maybe not the actual recording itself, but certainly the songs and just the general overall feel. This set, as I said before, this set up the live shows for the next several years, several tours anyway.
And here we are 50 years down the road, and some of these songs are still on the set. They were in 2023, and I'm sure they're going to be in the set in 2024 when Bruce and E Street Band hit the road again.
Yeah, and that's part of what makes those shows so great is that, a lot of us have nostalgia for these songs, and it's nice to see that the band enjoys playing them still today, too.
For Greg Drew, I'm Jim Rotolo. Thank you, E Street Nation, for joining us, celebrating the 50th anniversary of The Wild, the Innocent, and the E Street Shuffle here on E Street Radio.
That was the 50th anniversary of The Wild, the Innocent, and the E Street Shuffle album, hosted by Jim Rotolo and Greg Drew. Hear this again anytime in the Sirius XM app. Search